Welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 131, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Ruthie Amaru, who's currently the Chief Product Officer at Freightos. So Freightos is a leading B2B freight marketplace that's built one of the largest freight ecosystem networks, along with the tools needed for helping power global trade. So this is a really great chat with Ruthie, where we got to learn more about her background and experience working in the B2B space, what led her to joining Freightos, did a deep dive into Freightos' leading B2B marketplace, and also had a really great group Q&A. So really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Ruthie, welcome to the group chat. You have some really incredible B2B marketplace experience, and of course now at Freightos, which is a marketplace that's come up many times here in the community. So, really excited to have you join us here today, and would like to start off by saying, huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So before we jump into Freightos as a marketplace, I think it might be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background, though, for those that don't know you.
Sure. So I have a computer science background. I studied computer science at Hebrew and started as a developer and a development manager. But then really actually found my calling as a product manager. So I was product manager at many, many startups. I've always been in startups. Probably, I think I counted about 8. And most of them with exits. So, that didn't make me rich, but it was fun. Right, policy that an exit makes you rich. Very few people actually get rich, but at least you feel like you've done something. As a product manager, I loved making that connection between customers and software and making that really work. 3 of my companies I actually did with the same founder. So the founder, the company I'm in now, Zvi Schreiber, was founder of 3 of those companies. So we also built kind of a rapport and teams and whatnot. And actually kind of the shift I made in Freightos was to see for marketplaces, the product includes the business. Okay, so that's one of the interesting things that I learned very quickly is as a product technology kind of leader, I understood that it wasn't enough to do the tech. You actually had to include the operational side and the sales side and the P&L. And all of the business becomes part of the product. The business platform, the legal platform, all these different pieces are the product, right? And so for me as a product manager, it was very exciting because I went from being VP product to really becoming the chief marketplace officer for Freightos. I'll tell you kind of later after I did that, I went on to become the chief product officer for all of Freightos, going back into a product role. But that's a little bit about me. So really kind of, developer geek, product lover, and then marketplace, whatever. And I love marketplaces. If you want me to talk about marketplaces, I will talk forever. So you'll have to stop me at some point. But I just love what you could do with a marketplace.
Certainly. Yeah, that's such a great background. So thanks for sharing with us. And you mentioned a lot of great topics here that we'll jump into. So on the note about marketplace, right? And marketplace geeks, I think we can all relate with that. So what attracts you to marketplaces out of curiosity?
So when you're creating a product, you're giving somebody something to do, A or B, right? When you're creating a platform, you're creating a world in which you don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you're bringing together buyers and sellers. And the success of a marketplace is when you actually create new types of business that couldn't happen without that marketplace, right? As a tenant, that's what I believe is that a marketplace is succeeding when it's doing something that couldn't happen offline. And so that makes you a little bit of like a god. So that's one part of it. The other is it's like a puzzle. It's right. I always think about pipes, right? When you're creating a marketplace, you have these pipes, and if things aren't happening, it's because the pipes aren't flowing, and you have to go piece by piece and say, okay, where's it getting caught? If I just fix this pipe, will it now flow? Or is the premise wrong? Is the model wrong? Is what's happening wrong? But so it's this massive system. I loved when I understood how important the legal aspect was to it, and I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later, because the realization of how important it is to write an important, to write that legal, in our case, it's a standard operating procedure, but the legal documentation, and how that fits together with the software and how that fits together. It's just a world. You're creating a world. I mean, that's what I love. It's just like you're creating a world.
Definitely like the example of the pipes. So a lot of pipes and kind of moving pieces. So so we'll just jump right into Freightos. So what led you to joining Freightos, and maybe could you give us like a high level overview of it and breakdown as a marketplace?
Freightos is the world's first procurement marketplace or platform, or the largest procurement platform for freight. And the concept is that there's a $2 trillion market of freight. Okay. That means $2 trillion are being spent on moving goods around. And we're moving $23 trillion of goods around the world every year. Okay. And it's costing about $2 trillion. So our founder, Zvi Schreiber, likes big markets. So 2 trillion was about right for him, right? And when I joined, the thought was very straightforward. Let's do an Expedia for freight, because oddly enough, when you want to book travel, you go online, you go to Expedia or Travelocity or Kiwi or whatever it is, and you can see all of the options, and you can click book, you put in your credit card, and there you go, you're booked on a flight. If you want to move a container or a bunch of boxes from A to B, when I joined 10 years ago, and even still today, you would sometimes have to send a fax, right? You would make a phone call, you would send emails, right? So totally offline, no transparency, lots of middlemen and middle kind of in that whole process. And so, the concept of the company was, let's just make it easy. Let's say all those who provide the pieces to make goods move from one side to the other, and all those who need goods should be able to interact on a platform. Those who are moving goods should put their prices there. Those who need to move goods should choose the best way to move, and boom, right? So a very, very, very simple concept. So when, though, we entered the fray, we very nicely went to the people who provide freight services and said, hey, give us your pricing. We'll put it on a platform and we'll bring buyers. And they said, pricing? What does that look like? Right? So we don't have pricing. The way we get prices is actually been making a lot more phone calls and sending a lot of other emails, right? And this is how we solved our chicken and egg problem. So everybody in a marketplace knows about the chicken and egg problem. Buyers, sellers, who do you bring first, right? You need to bring one and have them sitting there. And so as soon as we understood that the freight providers didn't have pricing, we said, okay, here's our chicken or egg, one of them. Here's our tool. And the first thing we did, this actually happened for 2 years before I joined the company, was build a SaaS product to allow what are going to be the sellers to manage their pricing with their own customers, nothing to do with our marketplace. Okay. And we spent 2 full years doing that. We built that and got all of the top freight logistics providers, in this case, freight forwarders, using that tool, right? So we had 200 very large companies using that tool. And then we said, okay, now it's easy. We have the pricing on this SaaS tool that we're almost actually, we're making a lot of money on just that SaaS tool. Now we're going to tell them, hey guys, we're going to open that up on a public website and we're going to bring you buyers, right? And that's about the point when I joined the company. And when we said that to them, they said, what? No way. Are you crazy? There's absolutely no way we're letting you show any of our pricing to anybody. Okay. So we said, oops. Okay. So we kept on building that SaaS product, but then we created, basically we went to other providers. Now that we had the technology, we said to other providers, hey, do you want business? They said, yes, we want business. So we used our technology, we let them put their pricing on, and we started bringing buyers. And thus we created pretty quickly over a few years about a $40 million marketplace. Okay. Now, at the same time, we acquired another few companies that were doing similar SaaS products. Okay. So we would have more of that supply. But what we discovered is actually what that supply, right? They were our supply. They were actually looking to buy something from someone else. And we could use our SaaS to create another marketplace, which we did, between these freight logistics providers and the actual airlines. Okay? And this right now is a $1.5 billion a marketplace, right? And now we're actually bringing it all together to hopefully create a even bigger one. So that at a high level basically was coming into the industry, finding that place to start, stronghold with our SaaS product, thinking we were going this way, discovering we were actually going that way, and now trying to bring it all together.
That's such a great breakdown. So yeah, thanks for sharing with us on that. And it seems like the I would say SaaS-enabled marketplace approach is becoming more common. So that's on the supply side. So how did you think about demand and attracting that initial demand? Like who was that? Who was it for on the demand side?
Interesting thing is always, right, you think you're going to be everything for everyone, right? And then you realize very quickly that you can't be everything for everyone, and you have to find the people who you can bring particular value to, right? What we found at step one was we blitzed the market. We blitzed digitally. We have probably the best CMO in the world who does amazing digital marketing. And he just blitzed the world saying, looking to ship from China to US, right? So it turned out that most people in the logistics business would never even think to look online because there's nothing online. Okay. So the people who are actually looking online were the very, very, very small itsy buyers. And that turned out to be great for us at the beginning. So our demand turned out to be people who were entering the industry, had no idea how to do this, had no access to the logistics providers. You're talking about Amazon sellers, so people who were selling on Amazon, Shopify, all these great platforms had made it really easy to create online stores. And then people were saying, okay, great, I'm going to source a product from China and sell it on one of these, right? The way they were doing that is they were using local US importers who were taking a big chunk of money, and those people were handling the import. And we suddenly made it possible for what, is probably close to, before Corona and during Corona, was probably close to 500,000 or 1 million even, small businesses, mom and pop shops, make it possible to actually import goods on their own without using an importer, right? We didn't know that. On day one, we thought we were going to big businesses. We thought we were doing anything to anything. It took us trial and error of over the first, I would say, 6 months of really identifying the persona we really give value to. The second marketplace, it turned out that all of our SaaS users are our buyers right now. And that is golden, right? Because we've got these guys who are using our SaaS tools every day to do something with their customers, and suddenly we're allowing them to extend that back to their suppliers. And so that's really golden, and that's super lucky. And it never would have occurred to us when we started the business that would happen.
And that's super interesting. And I like how you mentioned as far as really identifying the kind of demand and the buyer persona on that. So I'm kind of curious, did you constrain at a certain point in time, whether it's, just saying, hey, shipping within, this kind of category or locations or?
Sure. I mean, and it was a little bit of an argument I had with my CEO where I said to him, look, in order to start getting transactions, we need to constrain our origin country, our destination country, and what types of freight, right? When you ship, you can ship by air, you can ship by ocean, you can ship a full container, you can ship as a part of a container, you can ship trucking, you can do train. So there are lots of different options, right? And the dream was to do everything, right? So when I came to my CEO and I said, I'm sorry, we have to start China to US, just boxes by ocean. He was like, really? You know, like, next you're going to tell me that you only want to do this zip code to this zip code. And I said, yeah, if that's what it takes, right? Because I had heard a great podcast by, I think it was the founder of Get, who said that when they started their taxi service, they did it on one block. They basically started in one block, right? And we know that of Uber as well, right? They started, what was it, San Francisco? And then when they wanted to find the next location, they looked to see where else searches were happening, right? So you know, the example I always give is that you decide you're going to have a flea market, right? So you tell everybody, hey, everybody, there's a flea market, come sell stuff, come buy stuff. And, you know, you have everybody coming to sell whatever they're selling and nobody's meeting, right? And then you say, oh, hey, let's do a flea market for books, right? And great. And then these guys bring, you know, big Russian volumes, and these guys are looking to buy, you know, kids' books. And again, they're missing, right? And so you say, okay, it's kids' books, right? Oh, different languages, right? You have to constrain at first to start getting those transactions, right? And you start getting those transactions, then, and only then do you understand what your value is going to be, right? Because you see that it actually closes. And you can think in your closed room that you know exactly what you're going to sell and exactly who's going to buy it. You have no idea, right? We know that about eBay. They were sure it was going to be all about collector's items. And then suddenly they discovered that people were buying and selling cars, right? You do not know exactly where your marketplace is going to go. And that's what's fun, right? But you're not going to know until you start getting transactions. And when you start getting transactions and you see if they're valuable and you see if they're going to be profitable, that's when you can start to grow. So yes, you have to constrain.
Yeah, that's probably going to lead to quite a few questions. So you got a few head nods here from founders. So you mentioned, as far as, you know, of course, kind of the matching or bringing together the transactions, right? So as a B2B marketplace, you know, trust is increasingly important. So, you know, how have you thought about, you know, kind of building that initial trust, and then, you know, some of the challenges kind of, you know, beyond that when it comes to transactions, such as like repeat purchase and so forth?
Let's start with trust. So trust was fun, and some of the things are obvious, and I'm sure you guys know about them, which is like, you know, we would have conversations with people and say, hey, would you book freight online? And they would say 100% no, right? But then we created a couple of mock-ups. And for example, we showed the picture of the guy who'd be handling the freight, and we'd say, hey, would you book freight here? And they'd be like, oh yeah, right? So it was like little tricks, like the picture, a phone number, a quality stamp, right? Things like that. So we knew that it was possible, right? That even though everybody said I would never do this online, and at the time we were also looking at these babysitter sites, and we're saying, like, if a babysitter site can work, then a freight, you know, marketplace can work. So, but then I think what was key and really, really pivotal was understanding what is the value we're giving to each side. Like, what do they need to trust in? So trust is a very broad kind of thing. And we needed to narrow that down. And what we understood is that the sellers needed to know that they would get paid, right? That's really all they cared about. Not all they cared about, but if they knew that they would get paid. And so we said, pricing guarantee to the sellers, right? If somebody hits book, you will get paid. Okay, we'll figure out later how we deal with that, right? But we knew that would keep the sellers on, right? And to the buyers, we said, price guarantee. The price isn't going to change, because that's what hurt them most, is that they would get one price for a move, and then they would add this, they would add that, they would add the other thing, and right. So for the buyers to know that there was a price guarantee. Sorry, the lights just went off here. The price guarantee was what they needed, right? And once we figured that out, that became our trust tenet and we did everything we needed to do to make that work, right? So on the buyer's side, we created a dispute process, which they would see front and center. If you're getting there will be additional charges, because if you're shipping, there probably half of the time there are additional charges, because you're on the receiving side. You don't actually know how many boxes are going to get sent. So you book 16 boxes. It turns out there's 17 boxes. They need to charge you for 17 boxes. But what we did is we created a very clear process for you to dispute any charge that you were unhappy with. And on the seller side, because we were guaranteeing payment, we needed to do everything we needed to do to make sure we were getting paid, because one transaction size, right? You're only taking a little piece of that. You lose one transaction, that can be all your profits for the month or for the year, right? If you lose a full transaction. So that's kind of on the trust side. We do have reviews, but reviews are tough, right? Reviews are hard to manage, hard to do right. It's a whole nother topic, but that was very important to us. But I think even more than the reviews and kind of the eye candy of making sure that people felt like they're in a trusted environment, was having those guarantees. And we also have a very, very clear, when I was talking about the kind of legal aspects, we have a very, very clear and detailed SOP, which is the standard operating procedure, which details out who's responsible in every single case. And we've evolved that over the 6 years or 7 years or 8 years or whatever it is, to be really like almost an industry kind of, people read our SOP and they're like, wow, this is great, right? Because it really takes the time, and this is what you need in businesses. They need to know who's responsible if things go wrong, right? So I guess, those guarantees, the eye candy, of course, the guarantees, and then the legal, infrastructure, to be really clear about who's responsible for what.
Yeah, I guess the second part of that was, going to be on how you encourage, repeat transactions and kind of, keep transactions on the platform.
The only way I know of is to have dynamic supply that is novel enough that it's worth coming back to the platform again. In our two marketplaces, the first one, we kind of got a little stuck in terms of growth. We still have lots of people coming and booking, but eventually they learn how to do it on their own. It's not novel enough supply, and they do go off, right? So that one kind of it got stuck, and that's why we moved to the other one, where the supply is always novel. Because when we're on our freight forwarder to carrier marketplace, we're selling actual capacity on planes, and every time you search, it's going to be different. And we have tens of carriers giving us bookable. And it sounds like really obvious that this is how you would do it in the world, but it doesn't exist until us. It's like, usually what happens is freight forwarders kind of send their boxes over, and if there's room on the plane, they put them on, and if there's not, they wait for the next flight. Nobody knows where they, whatever. Anyway, so novel dynamic supply is one way you can make sure that people come back. Other ways are more platform ways, right? So, and I think they're less good. Like if somebody's early days still trying to figure out what you're doing, do something with dynamic supply. Because businesses are businesses. Businesses want to have everything about a vendor relationship is worth gold to them, right? So it's going to take a lot for them to move from vendor to vendor. Okay. So as a marketplace, what's your value? Like when I travel now, I don't care who I fly with anymore, almost, if I'm going to get the cheapest one. So it's very, very hard if that's not the case. Okay. But there's a whole second world of capabilities that marketplaces provide in forms of the platform, right? So if a platform is a tool, So now as a buyer, I'm using your marketplace not just to close that transaction, but let's say in our case, it's also to track the transaction afterwards, to store my documents, to get alerts about pricing, whatever it is. There are all kinds of to audit, to do an audit later, right? So if you can provide value that would be valuable independently to closing the transactions, then you can also keep the freight forwarders on. Whoever your buyers are, right? But it's complicated.
Yeah, it certainly sounds complicated. Yeah, so I would say, like on a scale to 1 to 10, it sounds like I would say Freightos is probably up there as far as like an operationally kind of complex marketplace, or operationally intensive. So what is the what is the team like?
There are a lot of different products, a lot of different pieces of what we're doing now. At the moment, our company is about 400 people. But if I look at each marketplace, right? Each marketplace is made up of a product and development team, operations team, and sales team, and FinOps team, right? So, and marketing team, right? So, we played with different models of having like separate supply and demand teams, but it was a little bit easier to go for functional than splitting it all by supply and demand. But we did end up having an operations team that does supply and demand. So everybody tends to straddle both. I've seen in some companies that they do it differently. It's harder.
Yeah, it's always interesting to learn more about the kind of teams and work structures for marketplaces. What do you think some of the kind of pivotal moments in growth were along the journey?
If I look at the SMB or the micro kind of marketplace, what was pivotal to growth was actually understanding what each side most wanted and focusing everybody on that, right? The way we did it was literally, I said, guys, I will buy everybody ice cream if we can get 3 transactions this week, right? I don't care. I want 3 transactions this week, right? And that had everybody thinking, okay, where are we getting stuck? We have leads, we have rates, what's going on? Where are we getting stuck? And having everybody focused and having daily meetings to understand, wait, why didn't we get that transaction? I'm talking deep dive into everybody, right? And then it took a while, but that kind of started once we identified what we're allowing the transactions, and you got to get rid of all the noise, right? For example, I remember one of the things that really helped with our growth was when I said, cowboy transactions are now illegal, right? So cowboy transactions would be when some big juicy transaction seemed to be coming down the pipe, and everybody would like do anything they could to make it happen. But you'd have the whole team focused on one big transaction that was going to end up being messy and whatnot, right? But it was a big, a lot of money, versus those ones that got really no touch. Once we had a very, very big early kind of cowboy that really helped us move, where somebody had some huge growth opportunity. They were making some sort of toy and it worked really well, and they had no idea what they were doing. And suddenly they had tons of orders from Target and Kmart, and everybody was ordering like crazy, and they didn't know how to ship this much. So they went online, right? And I'm doing support, right? Because that's what I did, in the beginning, we're doing everything, right? And some guy saying, well, how much would it cost to ship? And it was like $1.5 million deal, right? And this is a big that really, really got us over the hump, because we suddenly were a real player, and the sellers were like, okay, we can get really good deals here, and this is really important. It turned out to be the kind of cowboy deal that later I wouldn't let anyone touch, because it was so high touch. But we did that in the beginning. And in the beginning, we had lots and lots of high touch deals. And then we spent 2 years just on growth, getting sales guys calling, doing everything we did. And then we spent a year optimizing for unit economics. So once we saw that we had the growth, we spent a full year getting down to profitability. We already had in mind the model, because that's really important to know how you're going to get to profitability. But it took a full year of figuring out, okay, do we really need all those sales guys making phone calls? What happens if they don't make phone calls? Do we really need, can we automate these 3 FinOps processes? Let's automate them. Like really figuring out how do you allow yourself to grow without hiring as things are succeeding.
So you of course have some really awesome experience with B2B marketplaces and of course with Freightos. So do you have any maybe high level tips that you might want to share with earlier stage B2B marketplace founders?
To get out there and doing things as fast as possible. I mean, first of all, I definitely, from my experience, you do have to decide who you're going after first and have a stronghold with one side or the other. I don't know, maybe it's possible, maybe you guys have done it, but I don't know how you just start on day one getting buyers and sellers. You have to have one or the other really, really entrenched, right, before you start getting the other. But as quickly as possible, get one side and then start getting those transactions. That's key. Don't be afraid of legal stuff, right? I'm saying it now, and I hope you guys feel like I did then. It was like, what is she talking about? But writing the document that describes the business relationship, right? What is your buyer's responsibility, your seller's responsibility, and your responsibility as a platform? Is spending time on that over time. The other piece of advice that we got very early on, actually, one of our board members is Bob Mylod, who was the CFO of Priceline when it went, and he said, own the payments, right? The payments should happen. You have to take the payments, right? Which seems very scary and daunting. And I tell you, the first time somebody hit book, what that book button did was send me an email. It was big, book, and sent me an email. And I'm like, oh, look, we got a booking. So we call the guy up and he's like, how do I pay? I'm like, here's my PayPal account, right? So, oddly enough, I probably can't share them, but Priceline had similar stories, right, at the beginning. So you have to get out there. You have to do it. You have to get the bookings happening. You have to get dirty, and you're going to have to work really, really, really hard at the beginnings. But get a good model that have a hypothesis for why having more buyers is going to get you more sellers, which is going to get you more buyers, which is going to get you more sellers. If you can't explain why that's going to happen, then you don't have the network effects. You're not going to have a marketplace effect, right? So make sure you understand how this marketplace can grow.
Yeah, those are going to be super helpful tips. So I will have to say that I have a few stories about the buy or purchase or booking button, and that being routing my personal PayPal in the past.
We've all done that.
Yeah, cool. So we're gonna get into the questions here. Hey, Dimitri, do you want to come on first, and then we'll get Andrew right after.
I have a question for you about sort of consolidation in this freight marketplace. It seems like, kind of given the returns to scale that are inherent, this is a market that maybe will sort of settle down with like a single firm in equilibrium.
I will say that the carriers, the air carriers and the ocean carriers, will do everything in their power not to let that happen.
Okay.
Because certainly the air carriers are very unhappy with the stronghold that Amadeus, Sabre and Amadeus have on that market, on the transport market, passenger travel market, that they are the only anybody, right? And so they can charge whatever they want. And the carriers are going to try not to make that mistake again. At the moment, we're leading, so we'd love to be we'd love it if we were one company took it all. But as far as we can tell, the sellers are going to try their best to keep it open.
Thanks for the question, Dimitri. Hey, Andrew, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. One thing you mentioned was owning the payments, and at my company, we're doing that. One thing we've noticed is that, so we out the gate, and we're a B2B, so we started offering credit card and ACH as payment options. Of course, getting the ACH would be great for our efficiencies, offer discounts to use ACH. I was wondering if you have any experience in kind of creating that behavior, and if you found anything that was a big move the needle quite a bit for that.
So ACH, the downside of ACH is that you have to wait to see it in your account. So when you're looking at unit economics and people defaulting and whatnot, you're not going to want to let that transaction go through until you see the money. And the question is if that's a problem for you or not. Like for us, that was a problem. And if it was an efficiency problem in terms of the team waiting to see that ACH come in, and I want a transaction to come in and everybody's done. It just happens, right? And ACH was now not so much because we've done some automation to be able to see when the ACH comes in, but it still creates a delay, right? Because we're not going to start the shipment until we see that it's come in. So it's an efficiency problem. I will tell you that our CEO was with you from day one. He said, I want to show a price for credit card and a price for ACH, which is lower. So try it and tell me if it makes a difference, because he wants us to do that. And I just don't think it's going to be that much of a needle mover. Because, okay, here's the other side of it is, as a B2B marketplace, you're going to want to give credit, right? At some point, somehow. And when you start giving credit, I think there's a high correlation between the people who are paying ACH and going to be asking for credit, and you're going to need to charge them for those ACHs because you're giving them credit, which is also costs you 3% or whatever it is. So, so it's a little complicated. I don't know that that's a needle mover, but it might be for you, depending on your margins and things like that.
Hey, Ruthie, I actually had a question for you on that note, which kind of goes back to your mention as far as on some of the initial kind of guarantees that you offered and that you offer today. So how did you think about, I would say managing that risk as a marketplace?
So we would build it into, I would build it into my P&L. So I would estimate, there were bad debt was one of the things we'd estimate. And then later, when we were trying to get to efficiency, we focused on reducing that. And the other thing that we did is we had promotions or money that we had two kinds of promotions. We had promotions that the sales team could give to get things going, and that's hugely expensive. You don't want to do that, but you may need to do it in the beginning, because remember, let's say, I don't know, if your take rate is 2 or 3%. I mean, you're lucky if it's more than that. But even if it's 10%, the kind of promotion that's interesting to somebody to get is that whole 10%, and then you've made nothing on that transaction. So, but in the beginning, you might need to do that, and so that's a budget line, how much we can give to promotions, and we also had a budget line for mistakes. So let's say somebody booked something, and then a seller made a mistake. Right? And there's a cost to that. Sometimes we didn't want to have to go back to the team, to the sides and make them pay for it, because, so we actually had, or sometimes it was a bug in the software. Like sometimes the software would calculate the wrong price, right? Once we went on to, once I get a call in the middle of the night and it's like, dang, do you see how cheap we're selling freight, right? Because there was a bug, and suddenly we've got people closing transactions at 10% of the rate, right? So we had to have a budget line for these kinds of mistakes, which luckily happen less and less over time.
Yeah, no, that's a really great mention as far as the mistake line. So I didn't quite call it that in the past, but I definitely had a budget that ended up being allocated to some of that. So. Well, cool. So we are almost out of time here, so I definitely want to be conscious of that. But thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. And this is definitely a really great chat. And I feel like almost each kind of topic or question could have been an entire conversation in itself here that we could jump into. But one last question that I did have for you right before we wrap things up, which is if you could go right back to before you joined Freightos, or maybe even entered the world of B2B marketplaces, what would you tell yourself about them specifically?
The need to stay flexible is really, really important. Sometimes, the other thing I think of is sometimes it's like you have this blanket and there's marbles rolling around it. So, like, for example, one of the things that happened to us is Corona. Ooh. Here we thought everything was one way, and then suddenly Corona happened. Imports grew by 30%. People were home. It exploded. Prices went 10x in the freight industry. And you can't predict what's going to happen. And your success as a marketplace is being super focused on creating that platform and watching where it rolls and try to, let that happen. But that's my learning.
Well, once again, got a lot of head nods for that one. So very relatable to us. Thanks again for the great group chat. We really appreciate taking the time to join us here today. So, and where can we keep up with you?
Ruth at Freightos. Feel free to write to me directly, and I'm happy to consult, help people out. As long as it's marketplace stuff about freight, that's my job. Okay, but marketplace is my passion. So if you have any questions or want to chat, anytime.